So arguably, if the centre decides that it doesn't want the scheme to operate in West Bengal because the TMC rules West Bengal, or they don't want the scheme to operate in Kerala because the communists rule Kerala, that can happen.
Absolutely can happen. That is completely within the power of the center, and it's
So we've
benefited.
got three critical problems with the funding. First of all, what was demand driven has become supply driven, and therefore, when the funds allocated end, that's the end of employment, even if there is existing demand for more.
Correct.
The second problem is the allocation to the states will happen as the center determines. The center could choose to give very little or a lot, depending upon how the center likes the government of the state. The
Correct.
third problem is that the center will also decide where in the state work will happen.
Or in the country.
Or in the country.
Yeah. And so it's not veto power.
There are three levels of concern.
Absolutely.
Demand driven becoming supply driven. The fact that the normative allocation will be determined by the center and the center may choose to give negligible funds if it doesn't like the state government.
Correct.
And then the fact that within the state, the center will determine where the work happens, and it could leave out large parts, it could leave out many districts, it could leave out half the state.
Absolutely.
This is all deeply, deeply concerning and worrying because it makes a total mockery of the existing MGNREGA law.
Absolutely. And that's why it is actually very unethical for them to say we are giving an enhanced guarantee of 125 days. We would have all welcomed it if that had been the case. This has completely demolished the idea of a national rural employment guarantee. Taking away the right to work is the worst thing that they could have done with the people of this country. Something that was working not perfectly, could have been improved, should have been improved, has been completely demolished.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.
Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire, a new law which seeks to change the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act into what will be called the Viksit Bharat Guarantee for Rozgar and Ajivika Mission, or VBG-RAMG, was tabled in the Lok Sabha earlier this week. The government is enthusiastically in support of this measure, but the opposition as well as social activists are strenuously opposed to it. Today we examine the proposed new law and ask, is this a change for the better or decidedly the worse? My guest is a founding member of the Mazdoor Kisan Shakti Sangathan, Nikhil Dey. Nikhil Dey, before we come to specifics and details, let me start by asking you for your overall view of the government's Viksit Bharat Guarantee for Rozgar and Ajivika Mission Bill, which was tabled in the Lok Sabha earlier this week. What's your overall view of this bill?
So, firstly, Karan, it's the most operational part of this bill is actually the fact that the MGNREGA is over because the bill repeals the MGNREGA. That is completely true, decisive. Now, what has been brought in its place is wrongly packaged, inaccurately packaged as saying that they are going to give an enhanced guarantee of 125 days. Like the MGNREGA gave 100 days of employment to any rural citizen in the country, 100 days per household. It seemed to people like when they made the announcement that they were just changing a name and actually enhancing that entitlement. When you read into the so-called bill, and I'll tell you why I call it a so-called bill, is you see that there is no guarantee at all.
Let me clarify for the audience, because this is a very important point you're making. Initially, people thought it was just the name that was changing. You're making clear it's not just only the name that's changing. The very guarantee itself that used to exist of 100 days employment has gone. There is a superficial attempt to say you're increasing the number of days from 100 to 125, but that 125 is not guaranteed. Is that the key point you're making?
Absolutely. That was the miracle, or in a sense, the most ambitious thing that the MGNREGA did when in 2005 it passed the only place in the world that, with the large population that India has, it really gave a demand-based guarantee. Whoever wants to come for work can come, and they are guaranteed 100 days of work per household anywhere in rural India. That has been demolished. That has gone.
So the publicity that has been given to the fact that the number of days which a rural household can demand employment for has increased from 100 to 125 a year, that publicity is mistaken. Because although on paper it says 125, the 125 is not guaranteed.
It is misleading, Karan. It is not guaranteed. It is top down and not demand driven, and therefore it's supply. However much supply you have, you are constrained by that. So obviously it's not a guarantee, and it's not across the country. And
let's then, against that background, come to the funding of this bill, because that's where you discover that this is in fact supply driven. It's no longer demand driven as MGNREGA used to be. First of all, the bill changes the ratio of funding between the center and the states from the present 90-10 to 60-40. The Indian Express estimates that this will impose an increased additional burden of some 30,000 crore on the states. How do you view that additional burden that the states will have to face up to?
Actually, Karan, that figure, if you were to really look at unmet demand, which is a constant battle, the law created that legal guarantee which allowed workers to fight. But actually, and they got, when we started our work in rural India some 40 years ago, there used to be a Jawahar Rozgar Yojana. That's exactly what we've gone back to. The center used to say that we have a Jawahar Rozgar Yojana, an employment assurance scheme. These were schemes that said this is how much money we have and this is how much employment you can give. It ended up giving employment in even areas where people made an effort of 6 and 7 days a year, even though they called it assurance scheme, even though they called it a Jawahar Rozgar Yojana. That's where we've gone. And right through, even with this law, people have been, the law allows you to fight even in court. It makes it justiciable. And we have found today, for instance, Karan, even with the MGNREGA as it is, there are already the money has been spent. And there is a constant pitched battle to try and tell the center to release more resources because they paid 100% of the labor and 75% of the material.
Let me stop you at that point, because I think I want to clarify for the audience a couple of points that you're making. First of all, you're saying that MGNREGA has been reduced to the old Jawahar Rozgar Yojana. The old Jawahar Rozgar Yojana was a supply-driven scheme. While the money existed, employment would be available, whereas MGNREGA was a demand-driven scheme where, depending upon the number of people that wanted employment, the money had to be made available. That is the key critical change. But within that change, the ratio of funding has also altered. It's altered from 90-10 to 60-40. And as the Indian Express estimates, this will impose an increased additional burden of 30,000 crore on the states. Are the states in a financial and fiscal position to accept this additional burden?
No, Karan. The NREGA would not have taken off from the ground if the center had not said, we are giving a National Rural Employment Guarantee Act and we are guaranteeing 100% of the labor component. You have to provide employment. We are giving the money. And maybe we'll give the money a little late. Even in the Supreme Court, when money has run out, as it's run out even this year, they have had to say, we will provide the money and we will provide compensation for delay in payments. That is the nature of the legal guarantee that existed. Now the states are going to be asked to give 40%. Never in the history has there been an employment program with that kind of asking the states to give it. And it's actually not even, it's not even across the country. It's where the center decides. It's what works.
Well, just a moment. Before we go into further details, are you also therefore saying that many states will not be able to afford the 40% that they now have to pay?
Yeah, and I am saying more, Karan. Many states will say we will not opt into this. We will use our money elsewhere. What will the center do? Many states will say there are problems even in existing center state sharing schemes, where when the state does not provide its share of the resources, the people suffer. They don't get whatever they're supposed to get.
So this is the first death knell. The states won't be able to afford to pay the 40% they are now required to pay. And therefore, in those states where that money cannot be afforded, the scheme simply won't function.
Correct. So it's not just a death knell of the MGNREGA, that has happened, but it's a death knell of whatever they are planning as well. That scheme is likely to be very unworkable. All the states are cash starved. I am really surprised in Parliament that their allies are not making a big noise. They themselves
Well, just a moment. I should clarify that today's papers explain that the TDP has actually complained about the states having to bear an additional burden. The leader of the TDP in the Lok Sabha, in the speech that he made yesterday, has actually complained about that. So there is one key ally that is irritated by the fact that the state component has gone up by 40%. I should, in all fairness, mention that.
True. But even there, the way that we are hearing that they're operating, that they're saying we will give you a special component here, we will do special things there. All this can only be done when you have an arbitrary top-down scheme.
Let's not get lost in those details, Nikhil.
Yeah.
Let's come back to the key concern. Now, the first key concern is that the states can't afford the additional component of having to pay up to 40%.
Yeah.
Second key concern is that what used to be a demand-driven scheme has become a supply-driven scheme.
Yeah.
That second concern is linked to the total cap of expenditure. If I understand correctly, the total cap of expenditure has been fixed at 1,51,282 crore. Does that cap at all seem sufficient for the sort of demand that will exist? Because if it's not, this supply-driven scheme, which cannot exceed 1,51,282 crore, will ensure that a lot of people who want jobs won't get them.
Yeah, so Karan, there are 2-3 things in the law that really need to be understood. 1,50,000 crores is just a notional figure. The center can do whatever it likes. It can make it half that amount. It can make it more than that amount, depending on how much it wants to spend itself. It's completely up to its whim. And the law, the most important thing that actually we haven't understood in this is that MGNREGA will be VB Gram G will be implemented only in those parts of the state that the center designates.
Absolutely. Let me come to these steps one by one, because we'll confuse the audience if we put everything together. Let's take them one by one, because remember, the audience is not aware of the details. You, as an expert, know them by heart.
Correct.
Now, first of all, the new proposed scheme states that the states are allowed to stop work for 2 months in total. Those dates they can choose for themselves during the peak harvest and sowing season. Is that stoppage of work for 60 days a year advisable, or is it a mistake?
It's a retrograde step, completely retrograde. For a long time, farmers' lobbies, big contractors have been opposing the big farmers, not all farmers. Farmers are actually in support of it because the works themselves have helped farming in various ways, making fallow land productive, various other things. But big farmers who are used to getting cheap agricultural labor in agricultural seasons found it was not that they did not get labor, but labor suddenly had a kind of minimum support price for labor. They could say that if you were exploiting them, we will go to an MGNREGA work. Now you have cut that off, you have banned it. And so where the labor had bargaining power because of NREGA, that was lost. Karan, I want to use this opportunity to just tell you what NREGA meant when it came in.
We'll come to that later. Let's
yeah.
just stick to this because I think it's
Yeah.
important. We should understand the new scheme first. I'll come to NREGA and what we've lost later on.
Yeah.
So you're saying that by requiring states to cease work for 60 days a year during the so-called peak harvest and sowing season, a minimum price for labor that used to exist previously has been done away with. And because that minimum price is done away with, labor will be exploited.
Yeah. So we are returning to a feudal colonial scenario where there was a minimum wage notionally, but there was no way it was enforced. And now, through this particular provision, you are banning that little place where people would have the bargaining power to be able to get just a dignified wage.
I should point out, Nikhil Dey, that the Indian Express has reported that even under Dr. Manmohan Singh and the UPA government, the government of the day did consider increasing the funding of MGNREGA by the states, as well as discontinuing the scheme during the harvest season. Of course, UPA didn't do this, but is it so surprising that the Modi government has picked up on the ideas and implemented them? Because they were there, they were being considered under Manmohan Singh, but they weren't adopted. So is it surprising that they would be picked up by Modi and implemented by Modi?
Given what they're doing to the repealing the law, it's not surprising at all. But given the fact that they were considered, debated, and very powerful lobbies were put off because MGNREGA had worked so well in all these ways and rejected as a result of that, for it to be done again is a clear indication on whose side this particular government is coming across. Because number one, on the side of the states made it clear that they will not be able to contribute, leave alone 40%, even an increased 10% of labor they could not contribute. And that's what made the scheme work well as a national scheme. And second, on the point that the bargaining power that labor had during this period, it was considered, and it was considered one of the most progressive things this law enabled in all seasons.
And all of that has been done away with.
Totally done away with. Totally.
Let's now come to the point that you were making. Under the new proposed law, the central government will decide in which parts of the country it wants to run the scheme. Let me quote the NREGA Sangharsh Morcha. The Morcha says, if a rural area is not notified by the center, there is no right to work for the people of that area. Doesn't that vitiate, once again, the universal guarantee of employment that used to exist? It was first vitiated when the scheme was made supply-driven rather than demand-driven. It's now been additionally vitiated because the scheme will only operate in areas notified by the center.
Absolutely, Karan. So what you have described in NSM NREGA Sangharsh Morcha quite rightly says that where it is not notified, you will not have a guarantee. I will like to actually invert that a little to say only those parts of the country where the center decides to run this scheme will this be applicable. So we don't know. It could be a third of the country. It could be a quarter of the country. It could be parts of a state. It's completely up to the center to decide where. It could be parts of a district.
Let me just ask you, are you really suggesting that the law is so worded that it can be arbitrarily imposed just where the center wants, and whole states, whole districts may not get the scheme implemented within them? Because if the center chooses not to do so, that's that.
I read from section 5(1) of the Act, just one line. The state government shall, in such rural areas in the state as be notified by the central government, provide to every household whose adult member has 125 days of work, etc. So, in such rural areas of the state, as notified by the center, is where this guarantee will work. So
in other words, the state has a veto over where the scheme will apply.
No, the center has.
I beg your pardon. Yes, the center has a veto over.
Not a veto, Karan. The center decides. When this scheme starts, the center will say we will work in these areas, and they can switch it off as well. They can say, no, now we don't want to work in these areas at all. So there is nothing that is like, this is the worst part of it.
So, arguably, if the center decides that it doesn't want the scheme to operate in West Bengal because the TMC rules West Bengal, or they don't want the scheme to operate in Kerala because the communists rule Kerala, that can happen.
Absolutely, absolutely can happen. That is completely within the power of the center. And after that, it is where they will give their normative allocations. They will decide how much allocation to be given, even for those parts.
Let's come to this question of normative allocations, because many people believe that's another significant change between the old MGNREGA Act and the new act, which is called G Gram V. Now, according to the Indian Express, this means that the center will prescribe objective parameters to determine the state-wise normative allocation. Does that mean that the center will decide how much money the states get?
Absolutely. Again, it's so clear in the law, Karan, that the central government, I'm quoting from the law, the central government shall determine the state-wise normative allocation for each financial year based on objective parameters as may be prescribed by the central government. I'm deciding the parameter, and then I will prescribe for each state how much they will get.
This means that in addition to the 60-40 split in funding between the center and the states, the center will also decide how much each state gets. And then within that decision of how much each state gets, there will be a 60-40 split.
Absolutely. That's how arbitrary and how top down and how centrally decided this entire program is. It's no use calling it a law. I don't know why they've replaced it with a law. They should have just actually repealed NREGA and said we are bringing in a scheme, a centrally sponsored scheme.
But this means that if a center government minister doesn't like, and I'll use the example of Bengal or Kerala again, doesn't like those states because they're ruled by the opposition, he may choose to give those states negligible funds.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If you combine the last provision we talked about, which you can choose which part of the country you want to do it. Let's say in Kerala, for instance, where NREGA is run so beautifully, you can say I'll only do it in one tribal district and in one tribal block, because you can say Kerala is so-called affluent, whereas all the vulnerable people in Kerala are the ones who come to NREGA, and it's benefited.
We've got three critical problems with the funding. First of all, what was demand-driven has become supply-driven, and therefore, when the funds allocated end, that's the end of employment, even if there is existing demand for more.
Correct.
The second problem is the allocation to the states will happen as the center determines. The center could choose to give very little or a lot, depending upon how the center likes the government of the state. The
Correct.
third problem is that the center will also decide where in the state work will happen.
Or in the country.
Or in the country.
Yeah. And so it's not a veto power.
There are three levels of concern.
Absolutely.
Demand-driven becoming supply-driven. The fact that the normative allocation will be determined by the center, and the center may choose to give negligible funds if it doesn't like the state government.
Correct.
And then the fact that within the state, the center will determine where the work happens, and it could leave out large parts, it could leave out many districts, it could leave out half the state.
Absolutely.
This is all deeply, deeply concerning and worrying, because it makes a total mockery of the existing MGNREGA law.
Absolutely. And that's why it is actually very unethical for them to say we are giving an enhanced guarantee of 125 days. We would have all welcomed it if that had been the case. That's what they say in the introduction to the bill that they will give. But when you come, a law has to be seen in its mechanisms, implementation mechanisms, and its enabling mechanisms. And this has completely demolished the idea of a national rural employment guarantee.
Tell me something else. According to the business standard, hereafter the center will decide the sort of work that is done under the scheme. The power to decide that is not being given to the states, and it's being taken away from the panchayat. Is that interpretation of the business standard correct? And if it is is this fact that the center will decide what sort of work is done acceptable to you or not?
Yeah, it is partly correct. It's already in the law that the center has these 4 thrust areas, that it will decide what is to be done where, in which way, so that their idea of Viksit Bharat comes across. But then the panchayats are supposed to plan within that. So they are like implementing agencies. That's all. They are actually not a planning body. Whereas in NREGA, and you have to understand this when you look at NREGA, NREGA had the entire shelf of projects and plans built from bottom up based on 260 kinds of permissible works, and what the Gram Sabha decided, what the Panchayat decided in the order of priority is what had to be implemented by law. This has been flipped by telling them this is what you will do. Now in that, you make your plan. So it's like...
So the critical part to decide what sort of work is done has been taken away from the panchayats and it's been claimed by the central government instead.
Absolutely. And it's put into the law, the thrust areas and how they will do it and which works that they will want to do in which part. They are going to decide the development framework.
Now, Nikhil Dey, perhaps the most inexplicable of all changes is the decision to do away with the reference to Mahatma Gandhi in MGNREGA and call the new law Viksit Bharat Guarantee for Rozgar and Ajivika Mission, or VBG-RAMG. What do you make of this decision to take away Mahatma Gandhi's name?
It's very, as you use the right word, inexplicable. The Mahatma Gandhi is one figure across the country where there is no controversy, and even the ruling party over and over again says that he's a figure who is the father of the nation, who brought in independence, who did various things. So why take it away? I know of actually no case where there are lots of controversies over names, Karan, lots and lots, as we know in this country. But Mahatma Gandhi's name is not taken away. And Mahatma Gandhi's name was put in this program after it began, after the law was passed 3 years later, because it was this idea of decentralized village development that was inserted into it.
Let me put this to you. Could it be argued, and undoubtedly the government is not making this argument, it's me, Karan Thapar, suggesting it, but could it be argued that the new law so fundamentally vitiates, destroys and demolishes the old MGNREGA that Mahatma Gandhi might not want to be associated with it?
That we would have to ask Mahatma Gandhi. Given how Mahatma Gandhi was, I don't think he wanted his name anyway. But I think for the rest of us, the names are an inspiration. And here, what disturbs me is the way even in their renaming that they have said Ramji, we call it Ramji. Because it's actually Gramin Rozgar Ajivika Mission. So why should one break that acronym up? There is no reason for it at all.
The truth is that new name, Viksit Bharat Guarantee for Rozgar and Ajivika Mission Gramin Bill, is a tongue twister.
Totally.
It doesn't roll off the tongue.
It doesn't, except the way that they want it to roll off. So they want to associate it with, and that is an insult actually, that really over and over and over again, Karan, you do not bring in religious symbols into development programs. There may be good things in it, there may be bad things in it, there may be controversies. You cannot use religious symbols to take some kind of legitimacy. It is unfair to the religion itself. And this
Finally,
is something...
let me put this to you. When you look at all the different changes that are proposed, and we've been through them in considerable detail, it seems that the very character MGNREGA has been completely demolished. In fact, you said a moment ago that this new bill completely demolishes the idea of an employment scheme.
Employment guarantee scheme.
It completely demolishes that.
Yes, it demolishes the idea of an employment guarantee scheme. To us, Karan, the name is not so important. The name is the symbolism in the political sphere that's taking place. For us, what's important is what was there and what is there now. And that is in the letter and spirit of the law. they have completely demolished the only employment guarantee program in the world. It was something that really has stood the test of 20 years time. There were lots of things that could have been improved in the previous law itself. There could have been amendments made within that framework. Even this government has said over and over again that we have now brought in MGNREGA 2.0. We have improved it. So, and they are the ones, their own Press Information Bureau repeatedly gives laudatory statistics of what it's done, because it has done. Nobel Prize winners across the world have talked of it being a fantastic program, bar none across the world.
And that is what is being done away with.
That is what is being inexplicably done away with. Or if you say there is an explanation, then deliberately done away with to hurt the rural poor and to make us go back to a scenario of feudalism, to go back to a scenario of where we had to beg earlier the colonial masters and beg others for work, to move from question of rights to a question of actually being a supplicant.
What was available as a right to the poor, they will now have to beg for.
Yeah, so I think, Karan, I would like to just go back to when we worked for 40 years in rural Rajasthan. We had a lot to do with many others for campaigning for this law. It came out of one slogan that people made across the country: Har haath ko kaam do, kaam ka pura daam do. Those are two things that gave dignity. We went to Rajasthan.
And those are two things that have now been done away with.
Demolished totally. There is not one line in the law that talks about wages, how much the wage rate will be, that it will be at least minimum wages. And that, given what they've done with the labor codes, it is completely anti-labor, anti-poor, anti-rural areas. But I do want to end with, Karan, just giving you a scenario of when we saw NREGA come in, what impact it had. Because I think that's
very
what
quickly,
will
because we're running out of time.
Yeah, very quickly. There were people, there was a drought, there would be thousands, there were few employment works, even through JRY and others. There would be thousands of people standing at the Sarpanch's house from 5 in the morning, hands folded, saying, please give us jobs, because there were only jobs for 50 people, whereas there were 1,000 people there. They had to beg, they had to pay bribes, they had to go all around, they had to follow the feudal structure. When NREGA came, they said, you have to give us work when we want and 100 days. It changed the relationship. It gave them dignity. It gave them the power to fight in the market. It changed the entire nature. For the first time, minimum wages became a reality because it was a market.
And now we've gone back to Johar Rozgar Rojana. People will once again be pleading for employment because no longer is it a right. It is now in the gift of the government to give.
Absolutely. And I think this is something that the government will learn. Taking away the right to work is the worst thing that they could have done with the people of this country. Something that was working not perfectly, could have been improved, should have been improved, has been completely demolished. And they have taken away something very basic from the people, large numbers of people in India, for whom they have clearly shown they don't care.
Let that be your verdict on the new bill. I thank you for the time you've given me. I thank you for your explanation. I thank you in particular for pointing out the many and fundamental ways in which this new bill completely, as you said, demolishes the very idea of an employment guarantee scheme. Take care. Stay safe.
Thank you. Thank you, Karan.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch The Interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.